The December wind rattled the windows of Baker Street that gray afternoon when Lady Margaret Ashford arrived with a mystery that would challenge even Sherlock Holmes's formidable powers of deduction. She was a woman of perhaps 55 years, dressed in mourning clothes of the finest quality, her face bearing the composed dignity of the aristocracy, even as her eyes revealed profound disturbance. Holmes, who had been analyzing the chemical composition of various bell metals, appropriate as it would turn out, set aside his work immediately upon noting the urgency Mrs. Hudson conveyed. Before I continue with this remarkable case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us proceed with the curious case of the bell that never rang. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, Lady Ashford began, her cultured voice steady despite visible anxiety. I come to you because my husband is dead under circumstances that the police have ruled an accident, but which I know to be murder. The evidence that proves his death was no accident is this. On the night he died, the bell in his study, a bell he always rang when he needed assistance, remained silent. Yet I know, as surely as I know my own name, that my husband rang that bell in his final moments. The bell that never rang, gentlemen, is the key to proving murder. Holmes gestured for her to take a seat near the fire. Lady Ashford, please begin at the beginning. Tell us about your husband, the circumstances of his death, and most particularly, explain this matter of the bell. Lady Ashford composed herself, clearly gathering her thoughts with the practiced discipline of someone accustomed to maintaining composure in difficult circumstances. My husband, Sir Edmund Ashford, was 71 years old, a retired diplomat who served Her Majesty's government for 40 years. 3 nights ago, he was found dead in his private study at Ashford Manor in Kent. The official determination is that he suffered a heart seizure and fell, striking his head on the corner of his desk. The police surgeon confirmed heart failure and judged the head wound consistent with an accidental fall. The case was closed within hours. But you have reason to doubt this conclusion? Holmes prompted. I have absolute certainty it is wrong, Lady Ashford replied firmly. My husband did not die of natural causes followed by an accidental fall. He was murdered, and I can prove it through one simple fact: the bell system in our manor. She leaned forward, her intensity palpable. Ashford Manor is a large house, Mr. Holmes, 53 rooms across 3 floors. To manage the household efficiently, my husband's grandfather installed in 1820 a comprehensive bell system, servants' bells connected by wires to pull cords in every major room. Each bell in the servants' hall is labeled to indicate which room requires attention. My husband's study has always had such a bell, and he used it regularly when he needed assistance. And on the night of his death? Holmes asked. The bell never rang, Lady Ashford said. That is the central impossibility. My husband was found slumped at his desk at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening by our butler, Graves, who had gone to ask if Sir Edmund required anything before retiring. According to the police theory, my husband suffered the heart seizure sometime between 9:30, when our housekeeper saw lamplight under his study door, and 10 o'clock, when Graves discovered the body. Yet during those 30 minutes, the bell never rang. Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Forgive me, Lady Ashford, but if your husband suffered a sudden fatal heart seizure, might he simply not have had time to ring the bell? That is what the police suggested, Lady Ashford replied. But you don't understand my husband, Mr. Holmes. Sir Edmund lived with a heart condition for 15 years. He knew his heart was weak. He knew a seizure could occur at any time. For precisely this reason, he kept the bell pull within arm's reach of his desk chair at all times. It was his habit, his absolute, invariable habit, to keep his left hand near that pull whenever he was working. He told me repeatedly that if his heart troubled him, his first action would be to ring for help. She drew a photograph from her reticule and handed it to Holmes. It showed an elderly gentleman seated at a large desk, his left hand resting near a decorative braided cord hanging beside his chair. "This was taken 2 months ago," Lady Ashford explained. "Note his positioning. This is how he always sat. The bell pull was his lifeline, Mr. Holmes. Even if the seizure was sudden, even if he had only seconds of consciousness, his instinct would have been to pull that cord. Yet the bell never rang. The servants in the hall heard nothing. And that, gentlemen, is impossible if my husband died as the police claim." Holmes examined the photograph with minute attention, then looked up with that particular gleam in his gray eyes that indicated genuine interest. "You present a compelling argument, Lady Ashford. The absence of an expected signal can indeed be as significant as the presence of an unexpected one. Tell me, who discovered your husband's body?" "Our butler, Graves. He had served my husband for 30 years and was devoted to him. Graves went to the study at 10 o'clock, knocked, received no answer, entered, and found Sir Edmund collapsed at his desk. He immediately summoned our housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, who confirmed death. The local police were called, the surgeon examined the body, and the verdict was rendered." "And the study itself, has it been disturbed since your husband's death?" "No, Mr. Holmes. I insisted nothing be touched beyond removing my husband's body. I had a sense, a woman's intuition, if you will, that something was wrong. The study remains exactly as it was that night." "Excellent," Holmes said, rising. "Watson, bring your medical bag. Lady Ashford, we shall accompany you to Kent immediately. I must examine this study, and most particularly, I must understand this bell system that your husband's grandfather installed." The journey to Ashford Manor took us through the gray December landscape of Kent. The house itself proved to be a substantial Georgian manor set in extensive grounds, its classical proportions speaking of old wealth and established position. Lady Ashford led us directly to Sir Edmund's study, a room on the ground floor overlooking the formal gardens. The study was exactly what one would expect of a retired diplomat. Walls lined with books, a massive mahogany desk covered with papers and correspondence, comfortable chairs near a fireplace, and the accumulated memorabilia of a long career in service to the crown. What interested Holmes most, however, was the bell pull. It hung beside the desk chair, a braided silk cord in burgundy and gold, ending in an ornamental tassel. The cord passed through a small brass fixture in the ceiling and presumably connected via wires through the walls to the bell system in the servants' hall. Holmes examined the bell pull with extraordinary care, testing its tension, studying the cord's condition, even climbing on a chair to inspect where it passed through the ceiling fixture. He then examined the desk, the chair's positioning, and particularly the floor around the desk where Sir Edmund had supposedly fallen. "The blood staining on the desk corner," Holmes noted. "This is consistent with the police theory of a fall?" "That's what the surgeon concluded," Lady Ashford confirmed. "He said Sir Edmund fell forward from his chair, struck the corner, and died from the combined effects of heart failure and head trauma." Holmes produced his magnifying lens and examined the blood stain minutely. "The pattern is consistent with contact, certainly, but note the direction of the staining, Watson. What does it suggest to you?" I studied the stain carefully. The blood has run downward from the point of contact, suggesting Sir Edmund's head was pressed against this corner for several seconds rather than striking it in a falling motion. Precisely, Holmes said with satisfaction. A falling blow would produce a different pattern, splatter from the impact, smearing from the sliding motion. This stain suggests sustained contact, as if the wound were pressed against the surface deliberately. He turned his attention to the study door and its lock, then examined the windows and their latches. Finally, he asked to be shown the servants' hall where the bell system terminated. The servants' hall was in the basement, as was common in houses of this period. Along one wall hung a row of bells, each labeled with the room it represented: drawing room, morning room, master bedroom, and so forth. The bell labeled study hung silent and undisturbed among its fellows. Holmes examined this bell with the same minute attention he had given everything else. He tested its clapper, checked the wire connection, and even asked Lady Ashford's permission to trace the wire's path through the walls back to the study, a request that required opening several access panels our host graciously permitted. The system is entirely mechanical, Holmes explained as he worked. A pull on the cord in the study causes tension on the wire, which runs through conduits in the walls to this bell. The clapper strikes the bell, alerting the servants. Simple, reliable, Victorian engineering, and apparently in perfect working order. He completed his examination and stood thoughtfully for several moments. Lady Ashford, I must ask you some questions that may seem unusual. First, tell me about everyone in the household on the night of your husband's death. Lady Ashford provided a comprehensive account. The household consisted of herself and Sir Edmund, Graves the butler, Mrs. Pemberton the housekeeper, 3 housemaids, a cook, a footman, and a gardener who lived in a cottage on the grounds. All had been present the evening of Sir Edmund's death. None reported hearing the study bell ring between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. And your husband's recent activities? Holmes continued. Had he seemed troubled? Were there any unusual visitors or correspondence? Now that you mention it, Lady Ashford said slowly, Sir Edmund had seemed preoccupied the past week. He received a letter, I don't know from whom, that appeared to disturb him greatly. He spent considerable time in his study afterward, going through old papers from his diplomatic days. When I asked if something was wrong, he said only that the past has a way of catching up with us all. Most suggestive, Holmes murmured. And this letter, do you know what became of it? I assume it's among his papers in the study. The police didn't remove any documents. Holmes immediately returned to the study and began a systematic examination of Sir Edmund's correspondence and papers. After 20 minutes of methodical searching, he discovered a letter tucked inside a diplomatic dispatch folder dated 1868. The letter was brief but ominous. Sir Edmund, you thought the matter buried with time. You were wrong. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Expect me on the 15th. We have much to discuss about Vienna. 1868. A ghost from the past. The 15th was the date of Sir Edmund's death. Vienna, 1868, Holmes said thoughtfully. Lady Ashford, what was your husband's assignment in Vienna that year? He was second secretary at the embassy, Lady Ashford replied. A routine diplomatic posting. He served there for 2 years before being transferred to Berlin. Was there any incident during that time? Any scandal or unusual event? Lady Ashford hesitated. There was something. I remember Edmund mentioning it years later, though he never provided details. An Austrian banker died under suspicious circumstances. There were rumors of British involvement, of documents that had been stolen. Edmund was questioned but never implicated. The matter was quietly dropped. He never spoke of it again. Holmes's expression had become very still, the way it did when encountering information of particular significance. I see. Watson, we must research the Vienna incident of 1868. Lady Ashford, I need you to provide a list of everyone who might have known about your husband's involvement in that affair. Anyone who might have harbored a grudge for nearly 60 years. Over the following day, Holmes conducted an exhaustive investigation. He telegraphed contacts in Vienna, consulted Foreign Office records, and pieced together the story of the 1868 incident. What emerged was a tale of diplomatic intrigue, stolen documents, and a death that had never been satisfactorily explained. An Austrian banker named Klaus Richter had been found dead in his office, an apparent suicide. But certain documents suggesting British espionage activities had disappeared from his safe. Sir Edmund Ashford, then a young diplomat, had been questioned about the documents and Richter's death. No charges were ever filed, but rumors persisted that Ashford had been involved in both the theft and the death. Richter's son, Johann, was 20 years old at the time of his father's death, Holmes explained. He always maintained his father was murdered and the suicide was staged. He swore to prove it, but eventually disappeared from Vienna. I've been unable to trace him after 1870. You think this Johann Richter came to England seeking revenge after all these years? I asked. I think someone came to Ashford Manor on the night of December 15th with murder in mind, Holmes replied. Whether that person was Johann Richter or someone else connected to the Vienna affair, I cannot yet say. But I am certain of one thing. Sir Edmund did ring his bell that night. The question is, why did the bell not ring in the servants' hall? He returned to Ashford Manor the next day and conducted what can only be described as a forensic examination of the bell system. He traced every inch of wire from the study to the servants' hall. He tested the mechanism repeatedly. He examined every connection, every conduit, every fixture. And finally, in a narrow gap behind a panel in the corridor outside the study, he found what he was looking for: a small mechanical device attached to the bell wire. Ingenious, Holmes murmured, carefully removing the device. Watson, observe this mechanism. It's a type of clamp with a solenoid operated by a small battery. When activated, it grips the bell wire tightly, preventing any motion from being transmitted. The wire above the clamp can be pulled all night, but the wire below remains motionless. The bell cannot ring. But who installed this device? I asked. And when? That, Holmes said, is what we're about to discover. He gathered the household staff in the drawing room: Graves the butler, Mrs. Pemberton the housekeeper, the maids, the cook, the footman. Lady Ashford was present, along with Inspector Bradstreet of the Kent Constabulary, whom Holmes had summoned. Ladies and gentlemen, Holmes began, Sir Edmund Ashford was murdered on the night of December 15th. The method was clever: suffocation, using a pillow pressed over his face as he worked at his desk. The murderer knew Sir Edmund would attempt to ring for help, so they installed this device. He held up the wire clamp to prevent the bell from sounding even when Sir Edmund pulled the cord. The absence of the bell was meant to support the theory of sudden heart failure, when in reality, it proves premeditation and murder. The assembled staff looked shocked, but one person, the footman, a young man of perhaps 25 named Thomas Wright, had gone distinctly pale. The killer, Holmes continued, had to possess certain qualities. First, knowledge of the bell system's mechanics. Second, opportunity to install the clamping device without being observed. Third, access to the study on the night of the murder. Fourth, and most importantly, motive connected to the Vienna affair of 1868. He turned to face Thomas Wright directly. Or should I say, Johann Richter, for that is your real name, is it not? Wright, or Richter, remained frozen for a long moment. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged. "How?" he asked quietly in accented English. "How did you know?" "Several factors," Holmes replied. "Your age fits. You would be 77, the same age as Johann Richter. Your accent, though carefully suppressed, occasionally shows Germanic pronunciation patterns. Most tellingly, you were hired as footman at Ashford Manor exactly 6 months ago, just long enough to learn the household routines and plan your revenge." Richter, for it was indeed he, seemed almost relieved to abandon his pretense. "My father was murdered by this man," he said, gesturing toward Lady Ashford. "Your husband was a spy and a killer. He stole documents from my father, then murdered him to silence him. For 57 years I have waited, planned, prepared for this justice." "Your father's death was tragic," Holmes said, not without sympathy. "But murder in revenge is not justice. You will answer for what you've done." The confession came then, in full detail. Johann Richter had indeed spent decades planning his revenge. He had learned English, changed his identity, trained as a domestic servant, and finally secured a position at Ashford Manor. He had studied the bell system, installed his clamping device in stages over several weeks, and waited for the opportune moment. On the night of December 15th, deliberately chosen as the anniversary would mean something to Sir Edmund, Richter had entered the study, claiming to ask if anything was needed. Finding Sir Edmund alone and vulnerable, he had attacked, using a pillow to suffocate the old man. Sir Edmund had indeed pulled the bell cord in his final moments, but the clamping device ensured silence. Richter then arranged the body to suggest a heart seizure and fall, pressing the head wound against the desk corner to create the bloodstain. "The perfect crime," Richter said bitterly, "except for one detective who understood that a bell that should ring but doesn't is as loud as any alarm." Johann Richter was tried for murder and convicted on the evidence Holmes had gathered. The clamping device, combined with his confession and his true identity revealed through Foreign Office records, provided overwhelming proof. He was sentenced to death, though this was later commuted to life imprisonment, given his age and the circumstances of his father's death so many decades before. Lady Ashford, vindicated in her certainty that her husband had been murdered, thanked Holmes with profound gratitude. "You heard the silent bell, Mr. Holmes," she said. "You understood that its very silence was the proof of murder. I shall be forever grateful." Some weeks after the case concluded, as Holmes and I sat before the fire at Baker Street, I reflected on the unusual nature of the crime. "The bell that never rang," I said. "It's a paradox. Evidence that consists of an absence rather than a presence. How did you first suspect murder rather than accepting the official verdict?" Holmes tamped tobacco into his pipe thoughtfully. "Lady Ashford's certainty was compelling, Watson. She knew her husband's habits, his careful attention to his heart condition, his invariable positioning of the bell pull within reach. When she insisted the bell should have rung but didn't, I understood that the absence of that signal was itself a signal, evidence that someone had deliberately silenced the alarm system. The clamping device was remarkably clever," I observed. Indeed, Richter spent years planning this murder, studying mechanics and household systems. He understood that the best way to avoid detection was to make the death appear natural. The silent bell was meant to support the heart failure theory. After all, if Sir Edmund could ring for help but didn't, it suggested he died too suddenly to make the attempt. Richter never imagined that the bell's silence would become the very proof of premeditation. "Do you think Sir Edmund knew the truth about his father's death?" I asked. "That Klaus Richter was murdered?" "Almost certainly," Holmes replied. "That's likely why he kept those old diplomatic papers, why the threatening letter disturbed him so greatly. He knew someone from his past might eventually come seeking answers or revenge. But he was old, retired, and probably believed the past buried deeply enough that no threat remained." He gazed into the fire, his aquiline profile thoughtful. "The case raises interesting questions about justice and revenge, Watson. Johann Richter's father may well have been murdered by British agents, with Sir Edmund involved. Richter spent nearly 60 years planning his own murder in response. Two wrongs do not make a right. Yet one cannot help but feel some sympathy for a man who devoted his entire life to avenging his father." "Sympathy doesn't excuse murder," I said. "No," Holmes agreed. "It doesn't, but it explains it. And sometimes explanation must suffice when justice itself is complex and contradictory." The case of the bell that never rang entered my notes as one of Holmes's more philosophically challenging investigations. It demonstrated his principle that evidence is not merely what is present at a crime scene, but also what is absent. The dog that didn't bark, the bell that didn't ring, the signal that should have been given but wasn't. Lady Ashford lived another decade at Ashford Manor, maintaining the estate and her late husband's memory. She left instructions that the study be preserved exactly as it had been, including the restored bell system. The clamp device that had silenced the bell was donated to Scotland Yard's Crime Museum, where it remains as an example of premeditated murder equipment. And somewhere in England's prison records is the file of Johann Richter, who waited 57 years for revenge, planned a perfect murder, and was caught because he failed to understand that the very perfection of his plan, the silent bell that supported a theory of sudden death, would become the evidence that destroyed him. The bell has rung now in a different way, the bell of justice, delayed but not denied. And perhaps that is the final lesson, that truth, like the peal of a bell, cannot be silenced forever. It may be muffled, delayed, suppressed for years or decades, but eventually, someone with sufficient skill and determination will hear what wasn't said, notice what didn't happen, and understand that sometimes the loudest sound is silence itself.